This past February, I had the pleasure of seeing our first speaker in a spontaneous moment come out in front of a crowd of several hundred people at the American Atheists National Convention in Washington, D.C. She did this not knowing that from that point forward her life would change. No, she did this knowing that from that point forward her life would change. It would never be the same. She did this knowing that the heat she would take back home for her decision would be fierce, and it was. She did so knowing that her 14-year career in ministry, the last served as a senior pastor for United Methodist Church in Florida, was over. She did this not knowing what her next step would be or where her next paycheck was going to come from. But this very brave step out into the unknown was anything but a leap of faith. It was a choice for reason. American Atheists was formed in 1963 by Madalyn Murray O'Hair and has labored ever since for civil liberties and the absolute separation of church and state, the separation of religion from government, and today Teresa acts as our public relations director. As part of her job, she actually gets to choose the theists that David Silverman gets to eat for breakfast each morning. Her story has made national headlines, and in the past year alone, she's been featured in mainstream media, including CNN, FoxNews.com, and NPR multiple times. Please welcome an absolute true statesman and a hero, Theresa Mcbain.
Well, I know how to make an entrance, I guess. Can you hear me now? No, I don't use Verizon for my wireless carrier. Well, my planned introduction was to come up and say, hey, y'all. I live in New Jersey now, and anytime I say y'all, do you know what kind of response I get? Where are you from? So as soon as I landed on the plane in Texas at Houston and started hearing people, seeing people say, oh, let me get the door for you. Oh, excuse me, ma'am. I was like, oh, I'm back in the South again. Now, true, the South didn't treat me very well after I came out, but certain little things you really miss, like, hey, y'all. Let me ask you this question, trivia. What are the 4 scariest words you'll ever hear from a redneck? Hey, y'all, watch this. That is exactly right. When I was younger, we won't go there. We won't even talk about that. This morning, I want to talk to you about change. How many of you have ever experienced change in your life? Anybody? More of you need to raise your hands because I see receding hairlines. I see gray hair. I see some of you who are like me and this part of your body refuses to obey now that you've passed the age of 40. Change is a part of our lives, isn't it? It's something that we fight against with every fiber of our being, but it never seems to listen. But for some of us, change, I forgot I have to point to the wall with this thing. There we go. Change is something that is more of a reality and it's more devastating. I've titled this, Shift Happens, and it is based off of a statement made by, there we go. It's based off of a statement made by a young man in 1962. Let me just shift over here. His name was Thomas Kuhn, and he coined the phrase paradigm shift. You ever heard of a paradigm shift? Many of you have. Most of you have. This is something that, in the scientific community especially, is a buzzword that has been circulating for the last several years. A paradigm shift is, for our purposes, it is something that is revolutionary, transformational. It's something that is type of a metamorphosis. It happens when a radical change occurs in your thinking process. Now, for those of you who are here who have moved from religion, raise your hands again if you were involved in religion at some point. You've experienced this same type of shift. It is probably the hardest thing you've ever done. Would you agree? Yeah, this means yes, this means no. You guys got to work with me. I know it's 9:45 in the morning, but you can do this. I don't have faith in you, but I know you can do it. It's something that comes about, as I said, as a revolution or a transformation in your thinking. It's not something, however, that just happens. It is driven by agents of change. In the same way that your hairline recedes or the gray starts to come in, there are agents of change that happen in our physical lives. There are agents of change that also happens within our own minds and with our own thinking, if we'll let it happen. Sky was talking about critical thinking. I think that's probably the key element that runs through all of the atheist, agnostic, free thought community. We refuse to take things lying down. We began to think for ourselves for whatever reasons. Hopefully my story will help to answer a little bit of that. Now, let's go back to the beginning. My story starts like your story. Man and a woman met, they fell in love, and they had a baby. And that baby was me. And it's so funny that there's a hurricane happening as I head back to New Jersey. Pat Robertson will say the American Atheists headquarters is in Cranford, New Jersey, and that's why God sent the hurricane there. Pat Robertson says lots of things. When I was born in Coleman, Alabama, and the story goes, whether my dad told me this just to be funny or not, I don't know. But he said that the moment that I was born on a Friday evening in December, there was a tornado bearing down on the city. So there's something about me attracting storms. I'm not really sure exactly what that is. But I began my life as a little girl, which I don't think my picture is coming up. There I am. See that cute little girl there? This is proof that I was short at one point in time. Where's Jerry? This is Easter Sunday. We gathered after Easter Sunday services every year at my grandmother's house, and we had fried chicken and mashed potatoes and biscuits and gravy and corn on the cob. And I grew up in Alabama. You can fill in the blank. Y'all are from Arkansas, right? Most of you? You know what we ate. Sweet tea. They don't have sweet tea in New Jersey. What's up with that? If you ask for sweet tea, they give you sweet and low. Did I ask for sweet and low? They also don't have grits. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. And they don't use mayonnaise, they use Miracle Whip. What is Miracle Whip? Seriously. Yeah, I know, Richard's cringing on the front row. This change in my life. Anyway, I was raised in the South, I was raised in Alabama, and unlike some preachers' kids that go wild, I wasn't that child. I was one of those girls that from the very first moments that I can remember in my young life, I wanted to be in church. I wanted to read a Bible. I couldn't wait until I was old enough and could actually open a Bible and read it for myself without having to listen to it. I wanted to be involved in every area of church that was possible. My dad was the pastor, so I was able to accomplish this fairly easy. I was one of those kids that was absolutely 100% sold out, in it to win it, as Randy Jackson would say on American Idol. I knew God, I loved God, and I wanted to serve God with my entire life. I have a little red Gideon's Bible. One Sunday night after worship service, we'd had a speaker from the Gideons come to be a part of our service. He called all us kids up to the front, and he gave us probably the best gift at that point I thought I'd ever received. Was a little red Gideon's Bible, a New Testament. I took that thing with me. I started carrying it with me to school, anywhere I went, when I had a free moment. Now I'm probably in the second grade, maybe third grade at this point. I read it, I studied it. If I sat next to you in class and I knew you didn't go to church, or I knew you weren't a Baptist, then I would take my little Bible out and I would try to find an opportunity to sit next to you, to share with you the truth, the saving truth of God's holy word. That was my mission in life, and I embraced it. I loved it. I knew that even at that young age that God was using me. As I studied, though, and as I got a little bit older, probably 6th or 7th grade, I started noticing some funny things in the Bible. I started asking questions about things. One in particular was the issue of women in ministry. You see, as early as 6 years old, I can remember feeling like God was calling me to be in ministry. And I shared this truth with my dad, and he said, no, you might teach children. You could be a school teacher or a missionary in Africa, but women, God doesn't allow girls or women to serve in ministry. So that question kind of troubled me because I knew for certain that something was happening inside of me. I knew for certain that God was calling me. And remember, I'm 6 years old and I know these things for certain. How many of you when you were 6 years old knew something for certain? besides the fact that you loved Winnie the Pooh, or Jell-O, or playing in the mud, or whatever else that 6-year-olds are supposed to think. I came to a section of scripture in the book of 1 Corinthians, and Paul wrote one of the most classic women in ministry verses that said, women keep what in church? Fill in the blank. Keep silent in the church. This is what I had been raised to believe. Most any time women serving in ministry or doing anything in leadership, anytime that came up, this verse was thrown out, right? No, women keep silent in church. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. Remember that one too? Paul wrote that one as well. Well, 2 chapters before that, when Paul is giving instructions to this little church in Corinth, he makes another statement that I had never noticed before. He says, when a woman prays, involves speaking in this sense, or prophesies, which definitely involves speaking in church, with her head uncovered, she dishonors her head. So wait a minute. My little 7th grade brain says, wait. Am I supposed to be quiet, or can I talk in church as long as I wear a hat? You know, which one is it? I can borrow Aaron's hat back there in the back. Which one is it? I was very confused. So I went to my dad, my dad, the preacher, and I said to Dad basically the same things I've said to you. I laid my case out before him. I said, well, which one is it, Dad? Which one did Paul mean? Which one am I supposed to follow? Which one is true? And he looked at me and he says, are you confused? Well, duh, yeah. That's why I came to you. I'm very confused. And he said, well, the Bible tells us, classic interpretive theology to rationalize something, right? The Bible tells us that God is not the author of confusion. Yes, you got it, didn't you? You knew what I was going to say. And His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So these things, we can't understand them. We are merely human beings, and He is God, so we have to take them on faith. So if you're confused and questioning, it means that your faith is weak. This is the message I took away from this encounter. And some of you wonder how somebody can stay trapped in this lifestyle, if you will, for so many years. This is it for me. Doubt, those little questions in my mind, equals lack of faith, equals sin. If you're a believer, what's the number one thing you don't want in your life? Sin. It's sin. So I walked away from this experience feeling like I had let God down and I needed to simply work harder. That was my solution. And boy, did I. If I hadn't been sold out and invested in the ministry, or invested in Christianity and serving God before, I was now. You like that, huh? I still struggled with this idea of ministry, and I'm really jumping over a lot of years. 40 minutes isn't long enough to really tell you my story, so allow me to jump ahead to where I continue to struggle with this idea of women in ministry and create a rationalization for myself. And the way that worked was I picked out all the verses that said women could speak in the church and ignored all the rest of them. It worked really well for me. It really did. And I went out in attempts to find a way to do this. I went to the prisons. For 4 years on Saturday mornings, you would find me in the local prison at 6:30 a.m. I know, I hate mornings. At 6:30 a.m., I was in the prison preaching to 250 women. On Sundays, over in the lower corner, you can see I was at nursing homes. On any given Sunday, 4 or 5 nursing homes. I would go from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and go in and lead the music, preach the sermon, pray with people. I felt like they were my own little mini churches. I was so happy. Now, I'm going to give you a break just to laugh. I want you to understand exactly who this person is we're talking about and the way I was raised. I was sharing with Seth and Jerry this morning that growing up, we didn't have a TV. I couldn't listen to anything but Christian music. I couldn't wear pants. I had to wear a skirt everywhere. Definitely no shorts. Couldn't swim because that was mixed bathing. Boys would be there. Couldn't dance because that's just having sex standing up. And I'm not kidding you guys. You think I'm doing that preacher exaggeration stuff? No, not at this point. I will later, but not right now. This photograph in the center, I don't know if you can make that out, but that's me standing in the front of my church preaching. This particular Sunday, I had prepared a sermon on how people lead you astray, using a scripture verse that says, guard your heart with all due diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life. Well, on my way out the door, I had a brainstorm. I had a brilliant idea. The best illustration that would ever be in the history of preaching. I grabbed my dog's pink collar and I grabbed my dog's pink leash and went to church. In the middle of the sermon, when I got ready to make this brilliant illustration, I called my husband up, and he was used to it. I used him all the time. He was an easy target. I called him up and I brought him to the front and said, let me illustrate how people can lead you astray. And I picked up this pink collar from behind the podium and reached up and connected it around my husband's neck. You can't see it, but he is giving me, you know, the WTF look that Dave Silverman had on O'Reilly Factor? That's the look my husband's giving me right there. And I connected the leash and started leading him around the church, feeling like I was doing the most incredible job that had ever been done in illustrating a point in the history of all preachers. I was like the greatest ever. Well, we left church that Sunday. I'm feeling like $1 million. We get in the car and I have a message on my phone from the chairman of the board saying, we need to talk. And it was not in the we need to talk, you did a great job kind of thing. It was in the we need to talk, you're in big trouble. Well, I didn't know why. Honestly, I didn't know why. Honestly, I was that sheltered. I looked at my husband and said, well, I don't know what the problem is. Well, he explained to me what it meant when a woman put a dog collar on a man. Needless to say, I never used that illustration ever again. But this was the person who was in ministry, who was trying to find a way to serve God, who was so in love with God that they were so sheltered that they didn't know anything at all about dog collars and whips and chains and that kind of thing. I met a young lady who was moving toward ministry in the Methodist Church. And I'm still trying to work through this process of coming to terms with women serving as pastors. And she began to talk to me. I mean, we struck up a friendship. Women who are trying to find a way into the church as pastors are few and far between because there's still a lot of resistance to that. So we became fast friends. And she started talking to me about the Methodist Church. And during the time just preceding that, I was moving into a more progressive stance in my faith. I didn't know it at the time, but I was moving away gradually from the strict fundamentalist evangelical faith that I'd been raised up in. And she introduced me to a guy named John Wesley. And John Wesley, actually for his time, he was pretty revolutionary. You know, he was still a believer, but the things that he said and the things that he stood for got him kicked out of the church, actually, to the point to where he had to preach in pastures. There's a story about John Wesley that they turned him out of so many churches, he went to preach in a pasture with a cow pasture, and the people who owned the property got so upset about it that they turned their angry bull loose on him. Sounds kind of like the way we get treated sometimes, isn't it? Anyway, John Wesley, as I was studying his life, he made this statement. He said, in the essentials, unity. In the non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. Now, this is something that I could really get behind and I could associate with. Because what this was saying to me was that as long as I held on to the very core elements of Christianity, which if you were raised in a church that followed the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed, you guys know this means yes. Then it lays out pretty simply the basics of what Christianity is about. God the Father, Jesus His Son, the Holy Spirit, born of a Virgin Mary, suffered, was crucified and died, rose again on the third day, will come again to receive us all unto Himself. All those things. They're very basic, very bare bones kind of description of what the Christian faith is about. So as long as I held to those things, then the questions that I had been trying to suppress for so many years, for decades actually, I could start to deal with them. I could start to let them pop up and come into the realm of my thinking and look at them honestly and critically. And as I did that, I slowly moved away again into a more liberal and a more progressive stance. John Wesley made another statement that really helped along in this process. He said, though we may not think alike, may we not all love alike. Now, Sky just mentioned that just a minute ago, didn't he? It's like our goal is critical thinking. Our goal is to have people think for themselves, to explore, not to just take Joel Osteen's word for it, or Billy Graham's word for it, or even Richard Dawkins' word for it, but to think, to use this noodle that's inside our head for more than just holding our bones and our skin on there. I don't know. But to think. When Wesley said that in his book, it was like the floodgates had opened for me. I finally had permission to think, and this was enter dun dun dun. It was the beginning of the end. I immediately started looking again at the Bible, which had been a big issue for me for years, and I had just banished all those thoughts away to the dungeon. Well, now I was letting them come forward. I got out a notebook and a pen and just started going through and writing out every contradiction I could find, or every troublesome passage that I could find that I had ignored, things that I had hoped nobody would ever ask me to explain. You know which ones I'm talking about, right? Yeah, this means yes. This means no. If you don't, I'll share with you later some of those. And as I dug through, the Bible became less and less of a significant document in my life. It became less and less sacred. It became less and less credible, to the point where I basically, like Thomas Jefferson, pulled out just a handful of scriptures that I could follow and live by, and the rest of it had to go. It just had to go completely away. And at the same time I'm dealing with this issue came up, the issue of hell. Throughout the Bible, I was noticing the Old Testament. You realize, did you guys know that the Jewish people in the Old Testament really didn't have a concept of hell? That they had this idea of a place called Sheol that wasn't the place of the dead, but it was real sketchy. They weren't really sure what was going on, so they just left it alone, really. It wasn't until between the Testaments and then into the New Testament that this idea of hell came up. And it came out of the Greek culture for the most part. So there's your history lesson for the day. You feel like you learned something? Yeah. Oh, you guys are getting it. I'm so proud of you. I started seeing those pieces fall together. The Bible, hell. I started thinking critically again for myself, putting away, for the first time in my life, this veil of spiritual, mystic, I don't know, reality, or false reality, and started thinking about it. I thought about my sons. I have two sons, a 25-year-old and a 22-year-old. They were a handful at times, especially when they were about 12 or 13 years old. Invariably, during the week, I would get a knock on my door. I was a teacher at a Christian school, and I'd get a knock. Ms. McBain, we need to talk to you about your son. Oh, what did he do this time? You know, never once in that time when the teachers would knock on my door and say, oh, your son, he's been in a fight on the playground with so-and-so. My oldest son liked to fight. He got it from his dad, I guess. Never once did I consider that I should gather up all the students at that little Christian school, go out to the playground, make them gather around and witness the torture I was about to execute on my son, pouring gasoline on him and burning him because he had disobeyed me and he had broken the laws of God by picking a fight, actually. Never once. So if I, as the Bible says, am this frail, weak, unable to understand the ways of God, human being, if I would never do that to my child, how could God do that to me? How could this divine being who created me, knowing that I was going to sin, knowing that I wasn't going to be perfect, knowing that it would be difficult, as the New Testament says, you know, narrow is the gate, and few there are that find it. Why would this being torture us and punish us forever? So I took the Jewish path, the Old Testament path, and said, no, hell can't be real. So the Bible's going by the wayside. Hell is definitely gone. And I moved into this place very, very quickly of thinking about religion. I thought, well, God created the universe, and the universe is so varied. The universe is so complex, we don't even begin to understand it. So how could God have limited himself or herself or itself or whatever to one single path? If you came out of Christian church, which is the only one I can speak to, that's my past, you realize that is Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me, right? Most other religions have a saying that is similar to that, right? So my thought was, well, how can God limit himself to one way, especially when that way is based mostly on your culture, how you were raised, and what your parents believed, what your family practiced. So I did away with the whole thought of religion. I thought, well, religion doesn't have much to offer. The only thing that the only way it plays any part in us is it's the path that we take based on our culture to God. We're all seeking the same thing. It's just we take different roads, so all roads lead to God. That lasted me about a week. And I moved into this last piece. And remember, all of these things, it's difficult. People say, well, what moment did you know, or what moment was the turning point? Well, really, they kind of overlap. And they mingle together, and it's hard to pull them apart and say, oh, this happened in 2007 and this happened in 2008. Oh yeah, that was December 12th of 2011. No, I have no clue. All I know is it happened. The last piece for me, the straw that broke the camel's back, was this idea of theodicy. Anybody ever heard of theodicy? It's not the idiocy of theology. I will give you that right up front. This is my preacher word of the day that I can make you think that I look smart, that I learned something when I was in divinity school. Theodicy is the problem of evil. This is the area where every preacher alive, I don't care what they tell you, this is the area where they hope you will never, ever, ever in a million years come to them and ask you these questions. Questions like, why was there an earthquake in Haiti? Why did God allow that to happen and kill so many people? Why was there a tsunami in India, in that area, that killed millions of people? Why are little babies born with AIDS? Why are little babies born with spina bifida? Why are young girls raped? Why is the sex trafficking industry one of the fastest growing industries in the world today? How do you answer those questions? How do you deal with those thoughts? You know, how could God in the Old Testament order the slaughter and genocide of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people? You know, how could God allow the men in the Old Testament to take the virgins as their prizes? To, of course, teach them and train them how to be good homemakers, right? Yeah, not. This was really, as I said, this was the final straw for me. I came across in my reading and in my study a gentleman by the name of Epicurus. And he wrote, "Is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he is not all-powerful. He is not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Well, then whence cometh evil?" And this last one, I'm telling you, this one was like somebody stuck a knife in my heart and turned it. It was so dramatic for me. The last statement he says, if he is neither able nor willing, then why call him God? That was the point for me. That was the moment. That was when I realized that all the searching, all the questioning, all the doubts, all the thoughts, all the thinking, all the study, all the research, all the podcasts of Aaron Ra and Seth Andrews that I had listened to, they all made sense, finally, for once. Why call him God? It was a construct of human beings in order to answer questions that we can't answer. This is how I had lived my life for over 40 years. That's me in there. Say hi. And that's my Christian bubble. I'm willing to bet that many of you were raised and lived in a Christian bubble as well. Here's how the bubble works. Okay, this is my own thing. Those of you who have stolen it, I'm talking to you. Yeah, it's not Jerry this time, actually. The bubble works like this. Within the Christian realm, especially the more fundamental types that I was raised in, you exist, you create this bubble around you. Remember my statement earlier? Doubt equals lack of faith equals sin. That's the beginning of the bubble. Within the bubble, the things that are permitted are there. They are Bible study, they're prayer, they're Christian youth groups, they're Christian camps, there are Christian books and Christian music, there are Christian speakers and Christian radio shows, there are Christian comic books and Christian, oh my goodness, Christian rock bands as I got a little older. Everything within that bubble is what you're allowed to experience. And if you go outside that bubble, oh no, that's a scary place, because the enemy will then come and try to attack your faith. Which my thought now is, well, if my faith was so strong, why did I even worry about that? But that's another subject altogether. There's a little crack in my bubble. Do you see it up there? The crack started to form as I was working through all these thoughts. Now, up to this point, I had used only Christian materials. Now, this is important to note. I had only used different theological books, the Bible mostly, an exhaustive concordance, just some other things to try and make some sense of what I was thinking. But at this point, this little crack, it just dawned on me, well, maybe there's something else out there that I should be looking at. You think I would have thought that much earlier in my journey, but I didn't. So I looked on the internet and found this gentleman, Bart Ehrman. Didn't have a clue who he was. I just knew he knew theology. And I read through most of his books and found that really he just confirmed what I was already thinking all along. He made it seem a little bit more sensible and a little bit more logical because he'd been at it longer than I had. But I absolutely adored Bart and all of his books and read as many as I could get my hands on. I moved from Bart Ehrman into Richard Carrier's works. Now, if you've read Richard's books, you know that he talks a lot about Bayes' theorem. Well, I have a degree in theology, not in science, so I really skipped over that part because it didn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm not a scientist. But the parts that he was talking about, the historicity of Jesus, those things really opened up more thoughts for me, more things for me to delve into, more ideas for me to try to circulate around in my brain. And at that point I realized I was raised in Alabama. If we were taught evolution in school, I don't remember it. We were taught creationism. I'm pretty sure the textbooks had it in there, but either the teacher cut them out or she just skipped over them. I mean, really, that's what happened. I went to a Baptist college for my undergraduate degree, and we didn't discuss any of that, not that I remember. The chance is really they probably did because I did get an accredited degree, but I just probably moved right past it without even giving it a thought because it's just a theory, you know. It's not really true. It's just a theory. It's somebody's idea that they thought up. And creationism, the book of Genesis, well, that's God's word. That's the literal way it had happened. So I reread Darwin's works. I reread a lot of the science books that I missed as I was growing up. And then I found Dan Barker. I was pretty desperate one day, just last year actually, and went on the internet. I knew there had to be somebody else out there like me. And so I Googled, I entered into the search bar, pastors who feel that they've lost their faith. And Dan Barker popped up immediately. His book, Godless, was the first on the list, and so I downloaded it on my Kindle and read it in record time. I think I was probably through that book in an hour, hour and a half. At the end of the book, there was contact information for Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I had no idea who Dan Barker was. He's just some guy that was like me who wrote a book. So I sent a message out, and he called me back within an hour, and we talked and talked and talked. This is the first person I ever vocally said anything to about losing my faith, about my doubts, about my questions. Everything had gone on inside this gray matter up until this point. Dan told me about a newly formed group called the Clergy Project. It had just started. And he said that there were, at that point, about 60 pastors who were just like me, who were online in this support group. I couldn't believe it. 60 people? Really? 60 who are out there like me, who are losing their faith? I mean, that was a shocking number to me. Now, today, there are close to 400 who have come and have joined the group, either former or active ministers who are still in the pulpit. The Clergy Project was actually huge for me. What we do online is we talk about our struggles, we talk about the issues, but more than that, we talk about the ways that we can get out. Developing an exit strategy, coming up with a plan of how to transition from one world to the other, to find a soft place to land. Let me tell you, I didn't find the soft place to land within my former friends, my former congregants, and my family. I found the soft place to land with you guys. That's where I found my home. That's where I have found people who would support me and love me and encourage me and stand beside me. It's amazing to me. You guys realize I was a pastor, right? You guys realize that I actually preached against non-belief and atheism, and yet the love that has been given to me is just beyond belief. One of my friends on the Clergy Project is a fellow by the name of Adam. Adam talked to me and he said, "Teresa, have you heard of Richard Dawkins?" I'm like, "No, who the heck is Richard Dawkins?" Some guy, right? And he said, no, you really need to read his book. So I read this book, The God Delusion, and no, I did not read it in an hour. Remember, I'm a theologian, not a scientist. This one hurt my brain. But when I finished this book, I knew my faith was gone. I think up until this point, I danced around the subject a little bit. And I played this tug-of-war game where on Sunday, some Sundays I would stand up and the music would move me, and the sermon, even though I was preaching it, the sermon would move me, and I would be like, oh, okay, this is just a phase I'm going through. I can make it. I feel God. But then as soon as I would get back home and as soon as I would get out of that emotionally charged environment, I'd be right back to, there's no way, it's not possible. So I was going through this emotional tug of war up until this point. And I realized, it's it. It's over. It's done. I've lost my faith. Now I have to get out. I'm a fraud. I stayed true to what I was supposed to preach because I felt that was my moral obligation, my ethical obligation. Can you believe that? An atheist has morals and ethics and integrity? Who knew? Who knew? But I knew I had to get out as soon as possible, which brings us to the American Atheists Convention just this March, 6 months ago. Seems like 60 years. Through a very strange set of circumstances, I was invited to stand before the group at the last part of the convention on a Monday and share my story as a member of the Clergy Project. Well, I accepted, and you remember, I'm in the closet at this point. I'm not even using my real name. I have a fake name on my name tag. So I accepted, and I step up on the stage very nervous, more nervous than I have ever been in my entire life to speak, because I'm going to stand in front of about 1,300 atheists. And remember, I'm a pastor, right? And I have actively preached against atheism, preached against non-belief in my past. I had my story prepared, I had my notes, I was ready to basically give the same talk that I'm giving to you right now, and I stopped for just a minute and I looked out across the crowd. And I saw faces just like your faces. Some of your faces actually were there. And I noticed that your faces looked like my face. And that your expressions were like my expressions, that you had emotions on your face, that you had people sitting next to you that you loved and that you cared about, and that you had jobs, and that you had cars and houses and stresses and joys and happiness and sorrow in your life. And that you weren't those evil people that I had been raised to believe. Actually, with the exception of David Silverman, nobody had horns on their head. I was overcome by the sight, and I pushed my notes away and knew the only thing that I could do was to stand and just apologize for the things that I had done in my past. And as I began to speak, this picture represents what had happened at that time and what has happened ever since. I kid you not. Again, this is not preacher exaggeration like I did just a few minutes ago in my talk. People leapt to their feet and they were crying. They were weeping. David Silverman, I think he ran up on stage and embraced me with the biggest, best big brother hug I have ever had in my life. You know, one of those rib cracking ones. Yeah, I had to go to the hospital after that. Oh, no. That was one of those exaggerations. Sorry about that. As I stood there, and as people wept, and as I wept, I didn't know what to think. I had never knowingly met an atheist. I had never been a part of a group of atheists. I didn't know that we, atheists, could be compassionate, could be empathetic, could be loving. For about 2 hours after the talk, people came up to me and shared their stories and encouraged me. For the months after that as well, people have sent me Facebook messages. I can't tell you how many times people have sent me an inbox and said, "How you doing? You know, it's been 2 months, it's been 3 months, it's been this amount of time, and are you transitioning okay? We saw in the news how your family or your church is treating you. How are you doing? How can I help you?" People sent me letters and cards. Now, I got letters from other people that weren't quite so nice and emails, but in the atheist community, I can honestly say I did not have one person attack me. Not one. Not one person say, "Who do you think you are? Some old preacher. We ain't going to listen to you. You were in the enemy's camp for way too long. You're just trying to infiltrate our ranks. You're running a scam." Let me say, if I'm running a scam, I picked the wrong one to run because it's pretty tough. So where am I now? In New Jersey, actually, with a hurricane bearing down on us. I moved. I accepted the position with American Atheists. They graciously offered me a job as their public relations director. Now, they didn't just give it to me. I had to go interview. I had to take a test. Test, really. I had to go through the same process as everyone else. But I found that being a pastor and being a public relations are about the same thing. So I have a new job. I live in a new city, not in the South, which means I don't get persecuted as much, but I also don't get grits, sweet tea, or mayonnaise. I have new friends. I have all of you guys who love me and whom I love greatly. And I have a new life, and that life is based upon critical thinking. It's based upon the freedom that if something pops up in my head, I don't have to suppress it. I can think about it. I can come to a conclusion about it. And it's okay if you don't think the same way that I think. I'm not going to persecute you for that, and you're not going to persecute me for it either. Now, just want to remind you, I'm not anything special by any means. I am just an average, whatever that means, ordinary person. But there's one thing that I have, and that's a voice. But you have a voice as well. And as Sky said at the very beginning, it's time that we used our voices to stand up, to stand out, and to speak out. We have a voice, and we can speak out on these issues. We can let the American public know and let them realize the very thing that I realized at the American Atheists Convention. We're your friends, we're your neighbors, we're your families, we're your co-workers. Yeah, we think differently than you do in one area, in the area of belief, but we are everyday, normal, average people, and we have value. When we do this, when we stand up, stand out, and speak out, that's when we make shift happen. Thank you.